Hey, good morning. I'm Joyce Coleman, the Executive Director of the Vasculitis Foundation, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session, Current Treatments for GPA and MPA, including the recently FDA-approved Avacopan. Thank you for joining us today. We are very fortunate to have a wonderful group of speakers and panelists joining us today. I want to thank them in advance for taking their time out of their busy schedules to join us and share their knowledge and experiences with us. We have a few housekeeping details. Please submit questions via the chat or question box. We've already received several hundred questions regarding the summit. So we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we are collecting them and hope to get them reviewed and answered at a later date. Finally, I'd like to invite you to our 2022 International Vasculitis Symposium, which will be held in Chicago, Illinois, July 15th through the 22nd. We look forward to welcoming all of our patients, family members, physicians, our vasculitis experts, and our researchers back for a weekend of learning, networking, sharing, and just hopefully a great conversation. We haven't been together for so long. It will be great to see people in person. So please mark your calendars, July 15th to the 17th in Chicago. And there's more information on the VF website. I am pleased to welcome today's moderator, Dr. Tanaz Kermani. Dr. Kermani is a vasculitis expert and associate clinical professor in the Division of Rheumatology at the University of California, Los Angeles. She is the founder and director of the multidisciplinary UCLA Vasculitis Program. She is a full-time physician, and her research interests are in large vessel vasculitis. She has several ongoing research collaborations and publications in the field. Dr. Kermani, thank you for joining us today, and I'll turn the platform over to you.
Thank you, Joyce, and welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Peter Merkel. Dr. Merkel is the Chief of Rheumatology and a Professor of Medicine and Epidemiology at the University of Pennsylvania. He's internationally recognized researcher and clinical expert in vasculitis, diseases that he has studied for over 25 years and has authored over 300 scientific publications. He's the principal investigator of the NIH-sponsored Vasculitis Clinical Research Consortium, which is a leading international research infrastructure for vasculitis clinical investigation. Dr. Merkel's research focuses on clinical trial design and conduct, outcome measure development, clinical epidemiology, genetic epidemiology, and biomarker discovery. Dr. Merkel receives the majority of his research support from the NIH, the US Food and Drug Administration, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, with additional funding from industry sources and private foundations. And he's going to talk to us about ANCA-associated vasculitis. Welcome, Dr. Merkel.
So thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, or whatever time you're listening to this later. I'm delighted to be speaking about current treatment of ANCA-associated vasculitis, including Avacopan, here for the Vasculitis Foundation. As Dr. Kermani said, I do a number of different things in the vasculitis world, and I'm happy to be here again today as part of the Vasculitis Foundation. I would say, I know Dr. Kermani feels the same way. We are part of the Vasculitis Foundation. The doctors, the patients, staff, everybody, we're all part of one Vasculitis Foundation. So I want to let you know, this is actually important. I do a lot of work with a variety of companies to help support clinical research and drug development in vasculitis. There are a lot of companies, you'll be happy to know, interested in our diseases, which is great because we can hopefully get more and more new treatments. Particularly for today, you should know that I've worked closely, including gotten funding from Chemocentrics, the manufacturer of Avacopan, but I've also worked with manufacturers of all the other ones as well. But you should know that as I proceed. First, I want to tell you that when we talk about treatment, this is an important, these are important series of publications. These just came out this past summer. These are the American College of Rheumatology, which is the leading professional organization, one of the leading ones in the world, and the professional organization in the United States for rheumatologists, combined with the Vasculitis Foundation, our Vasculitis Foundation, to produce guidelines. I was part of this group, and this was a multi-year project to develop evidence-based guidelines for the treatment of many types of vasculitis, including in the upper left, you'll see ANCA-associated vasculitis. These are very influential, and I will tell you that these new guidelines are important and are consistent with the lecture I'm about to give you, the information I'll give you, although there are always some different deviations. But it's good to know that these guidelines are out there. Guidelines are just that. They're not absolute rules. They're guidelines, and you and your doctor have to make decisions for the individual situation. So I'll be talking about ANCA-associated vasculitis. This is a slide with lots of different forms of vasculitis. I'm going to be specifically talking about microscopic polyangiitis and granulomatosis with polyangiitis, not eosinophilic granulomatosis with polyangiitis, although we study it and I care a great deal about it. It is a different disease, and it's different enough that it's studied separately. So not all the data that apply to GPA and MPA necessarily mean the same thing in each GPA. So what are our unmet needs in treating ANCA-associated vasculitis? Well, they're similar to the unmet needs in many of our diseases, but particularly we want less toxic regimens. And really particularly, we'd like glucocorticoid sparing. What does that mean? Less prednisone. The lower dose of prednisone, the least amount you can get overall, both in any one time and over your lifetime, the better in terms of toxicity. It's a great drug. As I like to say, it's the best drug we have. It's the worst drug we have. And so this is what we're trying to do, is come up with regimens to spare that. We'd also like to avoid cyclophosphamide if we can, reduce infections, less expensive drugs, more rapid induction of remission. We very much need that. We need to get people into remission quickly so that damage isn't accumulated along the way. And that's important. We want to prevent relapse. This disease used to be much worse in terms of our inability to treat, and we didn't get people into remission. Now we can keep people in remission for a long time, but now the problem is relapse. It becomes a very recurrently relapsing disease. So keeping people in what we call remission or maintenance remission is a continued need. We're doing better, but we can do even better. And then all of these other needs down below, we need to be able to treat all forms of the disease. And I think we should work for a cure for sure. But until we do, we're going to have these other treatments. So what's the standard of care? Standard of care meaning generally accepted best practice according to the guidelines, according to what we know. But again, you deviate as need be for your situation. Well, this is the multiple arrows, multiple different things. This is the flow chart in that article I told you about from the PCR and VF. You'll notice they're all in pale green. Why is that important? Because that is a level of evidence. We have good evidence, but we don't have as much as in, for example, diabetes or heart disease, where they may have 10 trials for a particular question. We often only have one to make decisions. It's good data, but it's not as definitive as we'd like, but it's pretty good data to guide our therapy. I'm going to start by saying, how do you treat non-severe? What do I mean by that? And I'm going to show you a more explanation of that later. But non-severe meaning not organ or life-threatening, things that are not as bad. Now, most patients, when they first present with ANCA-associated vasculitis, actually do have an organ or life-threatening disease. They might have kidney disease, they might have bleeding, they might have bad eye disease. With relapses, patients often have less severe disease. They could get more severe disease, but hopefully we catch it early. Hopefully you report to your doctor, I got new problems, or your doctor finds something. And so that's why there's more non-severe when it's relapsing. So how do we treat patients? Well, we have phases called remission induction and remission maintenance. Remission induction means put people into remission, no evidence of active vasculitis, get rid of all the inflammation. Sometimes you still have problems because things haven't completely healed, but you still might be in remission. And that's a confusing concept. For example, if you have you might have a pulmonary nodule, a growth in your lung. It's no longer growing and it feels good, but it still may be there. It may be there forever, actually, as it scars down, but you can still be in remission. Remission maintenance is staying in remission on or off drugs. And so we treat for a few months to get people in remission, and then we treat for a long time to keep people in remission. And that becomes an issue of how long. For non-severe disease, we always use, unfortunately, still almost always glucocorticoids, prednisone, methylprednisolone, solumetrol, all of those things. We use it, we go down slowly, or quickly, as I think we should do now, but we go down steadily. We also sometimes keep people on low doses. That's a controversial area. We're doing some research to figure that out. Should you stay on 5 milligrams for months and months or not? But It depends on how you're doing. We use methotrexate. It's a drug we use in rheumatology for many, many, many years. It's a good drug. It's well tolerated. You can't use this drug if you're pregnant or planning on getting pregnant, or if you have kidney disease. But it's a drug that can keep people in, put people in remission and keep you, and you can stay on it for a long time. Patients with rheumatoid arthritis have been on this for 20 years or more sometimes. But you can also use rituximab, and we're using a lot more rituximab now for everybody with ANCA-associated vasculitis. It's been a great advance when we did our trial and really helped get the FDA to approve this quite a while ago now. If you start with rituximab, you can go to rituximab afterwards, and there's very good data to say that's a good strategy. It really works well. And increasingly, we're using rituximab even for more mild disease, but methotrexate is still an option. What about severe disease? What about organ or life-threatening? This may not always be so clear. You could have what we call scleritis, redness in the eye, of a certain type. That actually is pretty bad, and we consider that severe, even if the rest of you feels really good. On the other hand, if you have sort of some nasal problems and cough and some aches and pains, all of which are annoying, they may not be severe. But for severe organ or life-threatening, which is the majority of the time people come into the disease, we're going to again use glucocorticoids instead of the tapering fashion. We'll talk about that. But we're going to use one of two drugs, either cyclophosphamide or rituximab. Cyclophosphamide, known as Cytoxan, brand name. I like to use the generic names when we talk about science, or rituximab, which is Rituxan. There's actually other brands of rituximab now, as there are these new what we call biosimilars, and those are okay too to use. We use those without any concerns. Cyclophosphamide or rituximab, we did a trial that was very important called the RAVE study, showed that the two of them are equally efficacious. They both work well. The trouble is cyclophosphamide has significant toxicities, especially if you have to use it a second or third time or for a longer time. And it's particularly not good if you're trying to preserve fertility and you want to have children after you get all this. There's lots of reasons that more and more of us are using rituximab for more patients. I'd say 80+% of patients, 89, are now being started on rituximab in the United States for severe disease. There are times that we still use cyclophosphamide. The pandemic with COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2 has made us rethink some of this because of how we may or may not respond to vaccines with these drugs. But then there's plasma exchange, we call PLEX. This is controversial. I don't have time to go over that today. We did a major trial that I helped direct, and we found that it was not beneficial. But there's some other data that make us rethink that. I think in general, our recommendation is not to routinely use plasma exchange, but we don't have time to go into those great controversies. As I said before, glucocorticoids on top, you can see you might go to a low dose for a long time afterwards. If you start with cyclophosphamide down below, you can see you don't want to be on it too long, a couple of months, maybe 3 months, 4 months. And then when you're in clear remission and your lower dose of prednisone, you're going to go on another drug. We usually use either azathioprine, which is also known as Imuran, or methotrexate. Mycophenolate, which is Celsep, or another version of it called Myfortic, is our third choice because it doesn't seem to work as well as these other two. So you can use that. That's a traditional approach. Or you can switch to rituximab, which is, there's good data to say that's actually probably better than using azathioprine or methotrexate. Certainly, we have data from a couple of trials to support that. But that doesn't mean the other drugs aren't also pretty good. So rituximab is the first choice, but there are other reasons that sometimes we avoid this medication, or you can't tolerate it or allergic or something. If you start with rituximab, you can use all these other drugs, but there's a tendency, a very strong tendency, to just continue using rituximab again to maintain remission, usually every 6 months. You can also observe off treatment. Sometimes that makes sense for some small group of patients, or not even that small. And eventually we do feel we have to stop therapy. Another option, of course, is to be in an experimental study. And then finally, this is complicated enough, you have the option of adding Avacopan. Now, first of all, let me tell you, see all these options I'm circling? When I was just starting out in rheumatology and studying vasculitis, we had exactly one of these drugs that we used, and that was cyclophosphamide. In the last 25 years, research has allowed us to understand how to use all of these other drugs. And so that has been a great advance. And so we've made a lot of progress, and arrows are good in this set. It means we have lots of options. Not a huge number, but still good options. The question is whether to add Avacopan to either rituximab or cyclophosphamide. I'm going to show you why that's an option now. But first, I'll tell you about glucocorticoids, prednisone. As I said, I would say, I'm not going to be surprised if we ask a question and people say they hate this drug. So this drug works very quickly. It really helps, but it also causes lots of side effects, as many of you know. So as I said, best drug we have, worst drug we have. Working hard to try to not have to use it so much. So they are key though. When you're very sick or when you're even moderately sick, nothing works as fast. It works very quickly, prednisone, to control the vasculitis, and it can be life-saving in some situations. Additionally, in the maintenance phase, some patients just require 10 or 8 or 5 milligrams every day for minor symptoms, even when they're on other medications. That's common in other systemic inflammatory autoimmune diseases. This is a common issue. So what do we want to do with glucocorticoids? We'd like to try to reduce the burden of that. We call that steroid sparing, because we call them steroids, although I don't like the term too much. It's a bit slang. So glucocorticoid sparing or steroid sparing, it's happening. These trials on the right, I'm going to tell you about 2 of them. These trials have all given us data. We helped with 3 of these. The other one is from Japan, the LOBAT study. They all say that we have strategies now to reduce the dose of glucocorticoids. And so this has really changed our practice. The first study I want to tell you about is the Pexavas trial. There were 3 of us, these two other people, Drs. Walsh and Janer, nephrologists, kidney disease doctors, one in Canada, one in the United Kingdom. 3 of us worked for 10 years to do this trial through the VCRC and UVAS. And this was a big, big trial, the biggest trial ever done. And what we looked at was plasma exchange or plasmapheresis, and also different doses of glucocorticoids. I'm going to concentrate on the use of the prednisone for today. We published this in the New England Journal, as we published several of these other papers, because this was an important advance in our therapy. What we did for the patients who had everyone who had severe disease, is we actually randomized patients. They either got the standard dose or a reduced dose of glucocorticoids. This is for somebody sort of so-called average size. Let's say you're, 160-pound person, and you would have gotten 60. After you got an IV pulse, you would have gotten 60 milligrams for a week. Second week, also 60, 50, blah, blah, blah. Continued. That's the standard. In the reduced dose, they got 60 per week and then dropped to 30. And so they dropped much more quickly. And if you look at it on a graph, the solid line, that's the usual dose of prednisone. And the dotted line starts off high, goes lower quickly. And if you see sort of how much room there's under, we call that the area under the curve, there's about half as much use of prednisone in the first 6 months than there would be in the standard dose. And what we found, this was very important, that's why it was published in the New England Journal, is that the trial showed that the reduced dose schedule for prednisone was just as good as the standard dose, but there were fewer infections with the reduced dose. So we really won on this one. This is what we wanted to see. So steroid sparing is happening, and we're doing it now with our patients, with you. The reduced dose that I showed you should now be standard of care. Again, that doesn't mean it's exact. You start with that and change as the clinical situation mandates, but this is now the standard. I think the low reduced dose. However, it's still not low dose. It's reduced. You should know it's not low dose. It still causes problems, but it's less. So what would be better than no glucocorticoids? I mean, better than reduced dose. How about no glucocorticoids or nearly 0? So here's another paper we published recently. Dr. Jane and I, again, were the academic leads with the company to conduct this trial of Avacopan for the treatment of ANCA-associated vasculitis. So what is this? Avacopan is trade name Tavneos. So the brand name is Tavneos, and the generic name is Avacopan. I'll be using the Avacopan name. Why are we using this drug? It blocks a substance called C5a. I'm not going to go over all of this, except to tell you that we know from laboratory-based studies and animal studies that this chemical, this thing called C5a, complement 5a, is part of the biology of vasculitis, of ANCA-associated vasculitis. And the idea was if we can block this, we can block the inflammation that's happening at the tissue level and the blood vessel level. We actually had these two trials. Dr. Jane helped direct one, I directed the other. Early, what we call phase 2 trials to look at the early evidence of use and safety. And we said, okay, this looks pretty good. So the regulatory agencies allowed us to go forward with the big study, the Advocate trial. So this was a randomized, double-blind, active control phase 3 trial evaluating the safety and efficacy of Avacopan, a C5a receptor inhibitor in patients with ANCA-associated vasculitis treated concomitantly with rituximab or cyclophosphamide. What does that mean? Randomized means you didn't know whether, if you were in the trial, I didn't know whether my patient was in one group or the other, and neither did the patient. And that's called randomized, 1-to-1. Computer decided what you're in, and we didn't know what patient was on. We could find out if we had to for safety purposes, but it's called randomized double-blind. Active control, what does that mean? That means everybody actually got treatment. Everybody got either rituximab or cyclophosphamide in addition to the study treatments we'll talk about in a second. So it's not that the patients weren't treated who got Avacopan, they were just treated differently. We call that active control. Phase 3 means it's a big study. It means it's the trial that if it's positive, it could lead to approval by the FDA or other regulatory agencies around the world. Patients had to have either GPA or MPA. They had to be ANCA positive at some point in their life. They had to have either new onset or relapsing disease that was pretty bad, moderate to high disease activity. There's a complicated design. I'm going to go relatively quickly because I think you'll get the gist of it when I show you the results. It was a 1-year study. The prednisone group, we call this the prednisone group. They got usual care with either cyclophosphamide or rituximab. They got usual doses of prednisone. It was actually sort of halfway between those two things I showed you for Pexavas. They got prednisone, and they got a placebo, a fake pill for Avacopan. The Avacopan group also got cyclophosphamide or rituximab, but they got no additional prednisone by protocol. They didn't know what they were getting. They were allowed a little bit of prednisone in the first 4 weeks. The doctor could give that if you needed, if you're coming off of it, but you couldn't have more than 20 milligrams, and you had to be off by week 4, so much less. They got this drug called Avacopan. It's a pill. It's actually 10 milligram pills. So you took 3 pills in the morning and 3 pills at night. And then we said, how did you do it 6 months? And how did you do it 1 year? And that's the study. We had 331 patients. But we had the majority of patients had new disease, about 69%, but still a good number of people with relapsing disease. We had a nice mix of PR3 or MPO ANCA, which means we also had a nice mix down below of GPA and MPA. And interestingly, in this study, 65% of patients got rituximab versus 35% who got cyclophosphamide. Again, it was done around the world. In some countries, rituximab is more difficult to get for new onset disease because of the cost, but increasingly it's being used regularly. So what did we find? This is at 6 months, 26 weeks. In yellow, you can see the rates of remission. They are basically the same. You can say, well, is that good? That is very good because the patients who got Avacopan got much less prednisone than the patients in the prednisone group. So they were able to do just as well without being on so much prednisone. At 1 year, 52 weeks, the group that got Avacopan actually had better rates of staying in remission. They were 66% of the time they stayed in remission and 55% in the prednisone group. So this was not only, this was better and on less prednisone. And that's a significant difference. Let's look at it another way. Look at the graph. You can see this darker line is Avacopan, the gray line is prednisone. This is patients, and when they relapse, they started relapsing early and regularly, unfortunately, not too many, but enough. And you were much more likely to, you were at least as likely and then more likely to stay in remission if you were in the Avacopan group. And you did this using much less prednisone. How much less prednisone? Well, let me show you. In the upper right, you will see this is the average dose. We call that the mean dose. It was much higher in the group, and this included even the intravenous. Look at it on the graph. The gray line is prednisone use. This is the dose in the prednisone group. and the red line was Avacopan. Once we finished the first month, there was much less use. And if you look at what we call the area under the curve, how much you're under here, they're different. Why did the patients in the Avacopan group even get prednisone? Well, some of it was just the intravenous dose we give before rituximab, and some of it was used for other reasons. So does this help? Well, it does. This is something called the GTI, which tells, it's the glucocorticoid-related toxicity index. This tells you if you're having damage and problems from prednisone. Gray is prednisone, red is Avacopan. Once again, not surprisingly, a couple of months, and 3 months, and 6 months, the patients who got more prednisone got more prednisone-related problems. And so this is great in that the patients of Avacopan were able to have much less problems. This is the SF-36. This measures how well people are feeling and doing in terms of physical and functioning and pain and general well-being. And in every case for the groups, the patients who got Avacopan did better than the patients who got prednisone. They just felt better, or they felt less bad, depending on how you look at it, than the patients who got prednisone. So we think that this drug, Avacopan, was shown to reduce the need for glucocorticoids and reduce the toxicity from it, while still improving disease control and actually keeping it going very well. I should tell you that it worked even after 6 months on to 12 months. So that's it helped maintain remission as well. We think it fulfills an unmet need to try to avoid glucocorticoids. So my bet is you have questions about this. And so I told the organizers, I think I just finished my 20 minutes, but I'm going to answer a few questions ahead of time because I think these will be very common. Per the FDA, who is eligible to receive Avacopan? So this is directly from the FDA printout, what we call the package insert. And you can see here that it says Tavneos is a complement C5a receptor antagonist indicated as an adjunctive treatment of adult patients with severe ANCA-associated vasculitis, GPA or MPA, in combination with standard therapy, including glucocorticoids. Tavneos does not eliminate glucocorticoid use. Why does it say all this? Well, let me tell you. What does severe mean? It means organ or life-threatening. Let's go over that. You know that there are many different things that happen in this disease. This is just some pictures. Lots of different organs are involved. It's a complicated disease. Hopefully you don't have all of these things, but patients usually have several of things at once. This is a list. I'm not going to go over the whole list, but just to show you that some things that I'm highlighting here, we consider severe. That doesn't mean the nodules and the nasal disease isn't incredibly problematic and changes your life. It's just not, from a medical standpoint, as severe. And so these are the things that will probably get you qualified to take Avacopan. Or there are other features that sometimes happen. Or what I call the total burden of disease. Sometimes you have so much going on, even if it's not severe, it's considered severe. And so it's a bit subjective of how we decide that. But that's who's eligible to receive this when you're first either having disease or relapsing, not later necessarily. What does the adjunctive treatment mean? That means you also get another drug. You also get either rituximab or cyclophosphamide in combination with standard therapy. That means the same thing. It's not that you give this drug on its own when you're first treating the patient. You might be on it later, only on Avacopan after you've come off prednisone and stopped other drugs, but not in the beginning. And so it says does not eliminate glucocorticoid. The FDA wanted to make sure that, patients in the trial did have some glucocorticoids. They do some prednisone. Not everybody did, but a lot did. But it's much less, and I think that's the key. So how would I use this? I am prescribing this drug. I used it the way we did in the trial. We'll start the patient and start them on and lower their dose very quickly. We get to 0 within a month. That's my goal. Can you get Avacopan if I'm in remission? Not really. For the FDA, only patients with active disease should be started on Avacopan. Can I get Avacopan if I'm in remission if I am on prednisone? No, not. If the FDA says only patients with active disease should be started on Avacopan. So I know you may want to say, oh, is it going to get rid of my prednisone? That's not what we tested. We tested whether or not it can put you in remission. Will this be the case later? Maybe, if there's more research to show that and we get more experience. And your insurance company will probably only approve it if you're using it when you first have disease or relapsing and are active. Is Avacopan a replacement for prednisone in all settings? No, it is not. It is a replacement for lots of prednisone upfront in combination with other things as we try to put people in remission. but it's a big advance. It's because that's not what the results said. As I said, we used it to put people in remission. Can I get Avacopan if I have a type of vasculitis other than GPA or MPA? No, you probably are not going to get it approved. It's quite expensive because it's only approved for GPA and MPA. Will that change over time? Maybe, if we can show data that it works. It may or may not work in other forms of vasculitis. It's being looked at in other autoimmune diseases as well. But right now, the FDA says it's for GPA or MPA. And we have no data on eGPA. Can I switch from azathioprine or methotrexate or mycophenolate to Avacopan? No, not really. It's not a replacement for another drug. It's to treat you when you have active disease to put you in remission. It may work in such a setting, but I'm not sure it'll get approved by the insurance company. And we don't have data on that to support that yet. But if you had a severe relapse, then you'd be eligible for Avacopan. How long should someone stay on Avacopan if they go in remission? This I don't have an answer to. I'd say you can stay on to 12 months because that's how long we studied it. It was only studied through 12 months. It's going to be studied down the line for safety beyond that. And the safety profile was quite good. I didn't show you that, but there were really no major signals for any particular safety problem. But that doesn't mean there wouldn't be when more people are using it and we watch it. But we think it's a safe drug. Right now, we're not sure how long you can go after 12 months. And this is a big question: is should someone started on rituximab and Avacopan who's in remission after 6 months be retreated with rituximab or keep taking Avacopan or both? This is the most common question I'm getting, and I will tell you, I'm not sure. I'm going to have that conversation. The drug hasn't even been out for 6 months yet. It only started being available in October. When we get to that point, I'll have a conversation with patients and say, would you like to continue to take this alone? Should we add rituximab again? And there's risks and benefits to all of this approach. And I think that's an interesting conversation. I would tell you, all of these choices are happy problems. It means we have options. What other factors go into the decision to use Avacopan? There are a lot of things. What is your individual factor? You got to discuss it with your doctor. There's cost, there's whether you get approval, and other factors. So in conclusion, the results of the trials I showed you firmly established the role of rituximab in the maintenance of remission. We use it a lot to keep people healthy. Pexavas did not support the use of plasma exchange plasmapheresis. I didn't show you all those data, but it did show, and there's some controversy, but it did show that we can use the glucocorticoid sparing. So at least I would go to the lower dose glucocorticoids in Pexavas, if not even lower with Avacopan. And that's what we're showing. So with Avacopan, I think we can go even lower and really minimize the amount of glucocorticoids. And there are growing data on we're obviously combining these different drugs now. And we have to have safety data, which we do, to say this is okay. There are lots of ongoing trials. There's some ongoing trials to continue to make therapy better and better. This is a list of some of the ongoing trials. Some of them have already been completed. We're waiting for publication. Just to show you, a lot of them have built into the design, can we lower the glucocorticoids or get rid of glucocorticoids? So I think I've shown you that some of the recent trials have addressed some of these different features of unmet needs. And you may say, how do I participate in research, even if I'm not in a major research center? That's easy. You should join the Vasculitis Patient-Powered Research Network. Dr. Gordon and I helped direct this. This is part of the Vasculitis Clinical Research Consortium and partnership with the Vasculitis Foundation. Everybody with vasculitis can sign up for this. It's online, VPPRN. We do lots of research through this. You give us information, we use the data, and we communicate with you about things. It's a great way to help to participate and help advance research. And I hope you consider joining and keeping up your data every 6 months. Give us information. Finally, if anybody's pregnant or you know anyone with vasculitis who's pregnant, please have them sign up for VPREG. It's easy, it's online. Women just sign up on their own. We need information about pregnancy and vasculitis. I'm going to stop there and take questions. I hope I answered a number of questions that you may have, but I'm ready to go on to the next thing and answer some questions.
Thank you, Dr. Merkel, for that great talk. One of the most popular questions is about common side effects from Avacopan. Could you comment on those?
Yes, so there really, there was no single side effect that came up. It is incredibly well tolerated. Now, again, I'm not here to sell the drug, but the drug was very well tolerated. The FDA wants to make sure we check liver tests, but we do that anyway when we follow patients. A couple of patients had some liver issues, although it's not clear it was the drug. Now, let's be clear. There were 300 patients in the study, so 160 of them got 165 got the drug, and there's some other studies that have the drug. But the number of people who've gotten this drug is not massive. So there could be rare side effects we're not seeing. So you have to keep that in mind. But we always monitor our patients regularly with chemistry studies, kidney function, liver function, blood counts. We watch for things. So it's not like you give the drug and you say, hi, great, come back in a year. We want to hear from you. Communication. You are the most important part of caring for your vasculitis. You got to let us know, the docs know, if you have new symptoms of any sort. We'll sort it out with you.
Great, thank you. And then some questions about how rituximab is being used for maintenance of therapy. So what should be the length? Do you do a wait and see approach or a scheduled approach? Can you comment on that?
The answer is yes.
All
of
them?
Those things. So it is, in fact, complicated. Again, the fact that we ask these questions and we have these options, I think is great. It means we have different things for different people. Most of the time, we will treat patients every 6 months, and we're now using the lower dose of 500 milligrams for the second dose for the 6 months. Although some patients break through, we give 750 or 1,000, and some people are just bigger people and they may need more. We tend to do it very scheduled. I think that's the best data. Some people talk about waiting for B cells and ANCA to go up. I personally don't think those data are that strong, so I give it scheduled. There are some people, at some point, you need to stop the drug, maybe. People who've had lots of relapses, we're very concerned about stopping this drug because the disease takes its toll. You can be on this for years. We watch your immunoglobulin levels. We have to make sure you don't get infected. And there are clearly issues, and the pandemic has really created some problems because our patients who are on rituximab don't mount response to the vaccine as well as other people. And so there is concern. However, that's a conversation you should have. There's a subset of patients who might be what we call MPO positive, myeloperoxidase, ANCA, who are never relapsed. They're very low risk of relapse, perhaps. We might just treat them once and watch. It all depends on what's happened with you and how you want to be. There's a risk to treatment. There's a risk to no treatment. And so you have to balance that as you go forward. But it's good to have options. My group and others are doing research to try to predict who's more likely to relapse and who's more likely to stay in remission. Because if we had some markers, it's not going to be one test. It's probably going to be a combination of tests and who you are and other things. That would be great. So that's our goal. So it's a very good question, and it's not an easy answer.
And then speaking about, rituximab and vaccine efficacy, how do people know if they qualify for Evishield? And if they are getting those shots, should they still be getting COVID boosters?
Oh boy, lots of questions there. So Evishield is, I won't try to, it's 2 drugs in one. So Evishield is 2 drugs in one. You take a shot in your butt, 2 shots actually, one each side, and it is antibodies that prevent you from getting COVID, or at least prevent you from getting sick from COVID. Who should get it? First of all, there's a bit of a national shortage, but that's improving significantly in the next, I think, few months. And even now we're getting more of it. Right now at our center, we're giving it to people who have been vaccinated because we still feel that's the most important first thing to do. There really is essentially no reason that patients should not be vaccinated. There's almost no good reason to not be vaccinated scientifically and medically. We give it to people who are vaccinated to help. It for people on rituximab, it gives you antibodies that you may not be making yourself, which is good. There's some risk. There's some mild risk, increased risk of some cardiac disease for some patients who get Evishield. There's always a risk of reaction. We've seen good results with this so far, but we haven't given it to that many patients. Who should get it? Right now, we're only giving it to people who have been on rituximab and are still on rituximab. And I do think people should get the booster anyway. There's a timing issue. You could wait a few months until the next booster. As you know, there's now a 4th shot, which if you've got 2 shots from either Pfizer or Moderna, then the 3rd shot is your first booster, and the 4th shot is your second booster. And so we're now recommending that for our patients who are immunosuppressed, certainly on Rituxan, to get the fourth shot. The CDC is probably about to announce that people, everybody 50 and over, may need to get a fourth shot as well. So I think we're learning to live with this virus. So I do think you should talk to your doc about getting Evusheld. I will tell you, not every doctor knows about it, and not every place it makes it easy to get. So you may have to shop around a little bit to get it.
Thank you. And then
there are potential side effects, so you have to sort of weigh that.
Thank you. And then the final question, is there research into the cause of fatigue, remedies to manage it, and are there any studies looking at this?
This is a great question. So we've published some data on this. There is, to my mind, no doubt that fatigue is part of chronic inflammatory diseases, including vasculitis. And it's not all fibromyalgia symptoms, not all depression. You may have all that because it's depressing to have vasculitis sometimes, but that's not the cause of everything. And so fatigue is common. I think we don't do a very good job of treating it. We can give you a little more pred, but then he has all those other problems, prednisone. We're actually running a trial right now looking at where fatigue is essentially the primary outcome. We're using a drug called low-dose naltrexone. It's a crossover study, kind of complicated. We hope to have that done by the end of this year, actually, to see if that will help with fatigue. So I will say this, fatigue is a real problem. We don't do that well with it. Lots of things like regular sleep, exercise, things like that can be helpful, but I don't think we have a magic answer, but it's real.
All right, great. Thank you so much for that great talk and for answering a lot of questions about Avacopan that were going to be on my list. And with that, we have another poll question. Kaylin? Okay, so the question is participation in research. How interested are you in participating in research that leads to a better understanding of vasculitis and potentially contributes to the development of new treatment options? 1 is no interest at this time, and 5 is very interested. Please vote.
Very interested to see who's very interested.
Okay, great.
So if that's the case, I agree. It's great. We cannot make advances without you. We cannot make advances without partnering with our patients. You should join the Vasculitis Patient Powered Research Network. Dr. Kamani and I are both I help run it. She's very active in it. And it's an easy way to participate in research. Who knows what's going on. But thank you all. Thanks for having me today, Vasculitis Foundation. And I hope this was helpful.
Great. Dr. Merkel and Dr. Kamani, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you sharing your time. We know you have busy schedules, so thank you. Now I would like to start the next session. This is a patient panel moderated session, and it's titled, How Do You Talk to Your Doctors About Changing Treatments? And I'm very pleased to welcome 3 of my favorite people, Dr. Jen Gordon, Dr. Kathy Olewski, and Dr. Art Diaz. Art, congratulations, I just promoted you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you all to do self-introductions, and then we'll move into the discussion after that. So Jen, let's start with you, Jen.
Sure. I'm Jen Gordon. I am the co-principal investigator along with Dr. Merkel of the Vasculitis Patient Powered Research Network. And I have EGPA. I was diagnosed in 2014. I had a lot of flares, took a while, but my doctors and I found a good combination of treatment. So I'm currently on rituximab every 4 months, mepolizumab every month, and 10 mg of prednisone. I'm doing pretty well. I live near Los Angeles in California, but tonight I'm joining from Dubai in the Emirates. So good to see everybody. Art, do you want to go next?
Hi, everybody. I'm Art Diaz. I reside out here in Garden Grove, Southern California, just outside of Los Angeles. And I was diagnosed with GPA in 2007. 17. I've been able to manage my disease very well. The last 6 months, prednisone was probably, like Dr. Merkel alluded to, the best drug and the worst drug I ever took. So that was a real struggle for me to take to eliminate. And then again, just slowly, surely eliminating drugs. So my disease has been relatively inactive or quiet the last few months. And then I think we have Kathy next.
Hi, I'm Kathy Olewski, and Joyce also promoted me to doctor. I'm not there. I did want to say that I'm also a patient living with MPA vasculitis. I'm the webinar host for the Vasculitis Foundation also. And I've run a business with my husband for 45 years. We own 3 martial arts schools, and I'm still active in all those things. I was diagnosed back in 2008 and was in treatment for 6 years. Bad, difficult treatment with all the drugs pretty much that Dr. Merkel mentioned and prednisone. And then after, multiple flares and remissions, I went into remission after 6 years of treatment, and I've been off treatment and in remission for 8 years. So I know I'm very lucky, and I appreciate all the research that's being done to help us all.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. I think we have a poll to launch now.
We do. Just before the patient panel, we wanted to ask a quick question.
Okay. The question is, do you feel your doctor listens to you when you want to discuss different treatment options? Looks like we have the answers flying in, so that's great. Few more seconds and then we'll close it. Okay, great. Thank you all. So it looks interesting because it's yes, definitely, we have some yes, but communication, no, I do not feel my doctor listens well, or haven't had that discussion. So thank you all for that information. And Jen, I'm going to start the discussion with, I'll start with you, but the first topic is going to be, so tips on how to talk to your doctor about considering a treatment, a different treatment plan. So Jen, let's start with you and we'll move around the room.
Okay, great. My approach is to really check in with myself and also with my doctor. I go every 3 months, and I want to make sure I know how I'm doing with my treatment plan. And I think about, how has it changed over time? So I sit down before every doctor's appointment and ask myself, how am I really doing? And what do I see for myself in the future? And even if I don't know I'm going to get there, because it's so easy. You get in the appointment and they say, okay, you seem like you're doing okay. See you again in 3 months, right? So you don't want to rock the boat, especially in my situation. It took a while to get the right combination. So if you want to talk to your doctor about this stuff, I think it's really important that you bring it up and you practice. How are you going to say it? It's really hard to have that discussion, and it's not something you're going to solve in 15 minutes in the office visit. But if it is really important, make sure it's the first thing that you bring up when you're in the office, and don't wait until you're halfway out the door and say, hey, doc, one more thing,
I'll go next if that's okay. Jen, I think that was really a lot of the things that I would have said. I also, even though I've been in remission for 8 years, off treatment, I still see my doctor every 3 months. I get my labs drawn. We talk about any possible symptoms that I might have. And I'm super excited about the research that's being done and more possible options out there. I did ask my doctor about a year ago about Avacopan, as it was just starting to be understood. And he wasn't convinced at the time that this was going to be something that could substitute for prednisone, which actually we found out from Dr. Merkel, that's not what the point is. The point is to reduce the amount of prednisone that we're taking in the beginning and to reduce some of the effects of steroids, which is what I want. I don't ever want to go through the massive amount of steroids that I had to take in the early years. I remember thinking that I was like a drug addict going through withdrawal. And I just, if we can keep doing research to do those sort of things, that's what I want to talk to my doctor about. And I find my doctor to be receptive to any conversation that I have, but I've got a great relationship with him. And I encourage people to find a great doctor that fits well with them. Art, you want to talk about your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Jen brings out a good point is coming prepared. And then how do you come prepared? You know, like you want to get, like Jen said, you want to get a assessment of your health. But one thing that I found that works for me is I usually like to write down the questions, because you might come in with some questions in your mind and then you leave and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot this question. So I always like to write down the questions. If possible, have a family member or caregiver take notes for you, because there's a lot of going on. I know initially when I was sick, I can take notes, or, you know, maybe my thought process wasn't all there. So it was helpful to have a second person there to take notes for me and ask additional questions. And then the other thing is a best practice that works for me is, hey, I have 4 questions or I have 5 questions, because it's going to vary from doctor to doctor. They're very busy, and a lot of times they're already headed out the door as you're wrapping up. And I like to start the conversation. Hey, I do have 4 questions for you, and question number 1, question number 2, so that doctor knows ahead of time, okay, there's three or 4 questions that we need to address here. But definitely coming prepared, and then again writing them down so that you don't leave that doctor's office forgetting something.
Great suggestions. And I love the list of questions and letting them know at the very beginning how many you have. So another comment or question that came in would be, how would you start the conversation with your doctor about changing your meds? How would you decide if changing medications would be right for you? What should patients be thinking about? Jen, you mentioned you don't want to rock the boat. You know, so Kathy, let's start with you this time.
Okay, I just want to say that, first of all, we need to listen to our doctors about what their advice is about medications. It's not bad to have a conversation about changing medications when you hear about these things, but it's super important to know that they have your best interest at heart. I think you do need to just ask the questions. I was on some drugs that were really hard on my body in the beginning, and eventually got to rituximab because it started to be available. And I really just always want to go back to rituximab because it put me in remission. So that would be what would be at the forefront of my mind. But I think when you're a new patient, you don't know what different medications you should or shouldn't be taking, and you need to kind of rely on your doctors. But you should always, I think Art's comment about bring a family member with you or a friend if you can, I think you need an advocate in the room for sure. So those would be my thoughts on that. Jen, you want to continue?
Yeah, you know, for me, I actually was in the trial for mepolizumab for EGPA. So I was a new patient, things were not working. I had the option, but, you know, now I'm doing well on a set of meds. Is it the best? Well, I'm still on 10 mg of prednisone. So do I want to rock the boat? You know, how do I make that decision? Just because there's a new medication out doesn't mean it's going to work better for me or that it's right for me. And that's a conversation that I need to have with my doctor. EGPA is, we have no idea if Avacopan ever will work for EGPA or not. It's not been tried yet, but I'm looking very closely to see what happens with GPA and MPA, because EGPA being a cousin, I'm hoping that the doctors will get some experience and that maybe we'll find out in the future. But again, anything we can do to keep pushing for more medication so we can try to figure out how to have alternatives and how to reduce the amount of prednisone that we're on. I think we're all trying to get to the same place.
And what I would like to add to that, again, as Dr. Merkel added or mentioned earlier, there's various drugs to treat our medications. And one thing, it's one drug may work for another vasculitis patient and another may not. So there are options. I, for one, was very, scared when I first diagnosed with vasculitis, and I was on a treatment course, and I thought those were the drugs I was going to be taking, and that was it. So I asked my doctor very early on, well, what if this doesn't work? Because again, I was very sick, and she said, don't worry, we have other options. We have other course of treatments to take. So again, like Kathy mentioned, you have to be your own advocate. And then another thing that was very important to me is seeking a second opinion. And I know my doctor actually referred me to a vasculitis patient to say, hey, let's just get a second opinion. Let's get a second assessment on your health. So I think it's important to obviously listen to your doctors, but get another perspective from another doctor. So I would highly suggest getting a second opinion if you can.
I think that's a great idea. A question that came in was, do you use electronic records in any way to keep track of what you want to talk to your doctor? Or do you use an app on your phone, or do you just scribble notes, or, do you have a method to the madness of keeping track of how you have a discussion? And Art, I'll start with you first.
For me, I just like to take notes. I know also too, a lot of that stuff is, or a lot of that medical records are tracked for me on my phone. The most common one I have out here is my chart. It's got all my doctor's visits. My other doctor has another use called Patient Fusion. It's got a record of all my lab results, so it's there for quick reference. I also out here I see Quest, and they also use that same, or I also use that app for that keeps track. So it's a lot to juggle between this app and that app, but I find it like to write it down on a piece of paper just for quick reference. But there's a lot of options to keep track of it. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Kathy, how about you?
Sure, I would love to answer this question. First of all, the Vasculitis Foundation has a great journal that you can use. So you can go to the Vasculitis Foundation website and find that. But I will tell you that when I first was diagnosed, since it was in 2008, there was not as much emphasis on digital content, and there wasn't a patient portal. I avidly use patient portals now for all of my records. But at the time, after my first year of treatment, I realized when I went into remission and then went back into a flare that I needed to remember things. And I was relying on my husband and my daughter and my best friend to help me remember things. So I started keeping a diary. It was on my computer. I just wrote down daily things every day, like what happened when I was on 60 milligrams of prednisone? What was life like when I was on 40? What should I talk to my doctor about? Because the next time that I flared, which I knew was going to happen at this point, I had my memory was terrible. So I had a really great resource. So that was what worked for me. I'm a writer at heart, and that's what worked for me. How about you, Jen?
I wrote everything down. I'm a researcher, so I collect data and then I make charts and analyze it. So I would suggest any of those of you who are earlier on, the newbies, write everything that you can down, even if you feel a little overwhelmed, because I think you heard all three of us in agreement. You never know when you want to look back at that information. So it's best to capture it at the time. But then as I've gone along, there's some things that I focus more on that may be more specific for my particular symptoms. But I'm very interested in trying to get at how do we really feel, right? How do I, and is it coming from the medication or is it coming from the vasculitis? How much is the fatigue? Some of these things are not captured really well in the lab values and whatnot. So I know that the docs know this and they're interested in studying it, and we need to do more research in this area. And that's one of the things we're trying to do with the VPPRN. To see what's important to patients and how can we measure what's going on and share that with our doctors.
I think everyone has the experience that you go to the doctor's office, they say, hey, how are you feeling? And you have to be honest. You have to be honest and not say, oh, good, I'm good. And then you think, no, I'm not good. So I would encourage everybody to think about preparing for an office visit and the discussion that you want to have with your physician and or the nurse or whoever is taking the data when you walk into the room, who's asking you the questions. Just be really thorough in what you provide, because everybody's rushed. The appointments are very rushed. So I would just encourage everyone to think about the appointments and make them worth really count for while you're there. So I see we're 2 minutes over the time. I promised everyone we would not go over 60 minutes. So I just want to say thank you to Jen, to Kathy, to Art, to Dr. Kermani and Dr. Merkel for your presentations. You're sharing your expertise and knowledge today. I'd also like to give a shout out to Kaylin Larson, who is in the background running everything electronically, and to Ed Becker, who is a VF staff, a media producer, who is keeping track of everything also. We did record today's session. After post-production work, we will make it available to everyone for viewing. And the last thing I wanted to do was encourage everyone to attend our 2022 International Vasculitis Symposium in Chicago, July 15th through the 17th. We hope to see everyone there. But again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I know it's a Saturday, everybody's busy. So have a great day and take care.